We're in getting started with Noesis Studio, a workshop is with myself, Shard 632, and with the Noesis Shaman, MKE the Guru. So both of us have been experimenting with Noesis a bunch and have some um, useful tips, hopefully, for people getting started with it. This isn't really a deep dive into all of the things you might be able to do new with Noesis. We're going to need to have a number of follow-on discussions about like various different areas of Noesis that they could have their whole talk just about some of those new features of the platform. So this is going to be mostly about how to just get started with Noesis, how to get it set up, how to uh, just get going with it and make some stuff that if you're used to doing custom UI, like now this is how you're going to do these things with the Noesis Studio. This is our agenda. We're going to kind of have a lot of things to cover. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be focused more on introduction to Noesis and sort of getting people bootstrapped up. So we're going to talk about setting up Noesis Studio because it is a whole different app that you have to install. Not very hard, but it's not totally turnkey because this app is still kind of in beta and the install process is not entirely like click and go and then it just always works. And you have to do some work to keep it updated. So we'll talk about the setup and then talk about common elements. Like there's a lot of little gizmos and doodads in Noesis Studio for doing your layout, and that replace almost all the things you would have previously used with custom UI and plus a whole lot more. So we're going to have a discussion about like how do you do sort of like the basics of layout? How do you do the basics of widget placement and alignment and whatever? And then we're going to have a discussion about data bindings and data sets. So that's going to be about like how are you going to wire all of this stuff that you set up just with doing the common layout elements. How do you now wire this to something so that you're going to be able to control it from TypeScript or learn about things from TypeScript? And so data bindings are how you do the wiring. And then one of the very cool things about Noesis is it has these concept of data sets, which lets you basically test run your UI in the studio before you even have to bring it into Horizon Worlds. Then we'll talk about how to import all that into Horizon Worlds. We'll take a little bit of a detour to talk about this utility that I wrote that helps you take all of the data binding and data set stuff you did in Noesis Studio and like auto generate a bunch of code for it so that then when you set up your shared execution mode script in Horizon Worlds, you're able to use Noesis and TypeScript and get something up and running pretty quickly based on all of the work you did in Noesis Studio with bindings and datasets.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you all and with Shards as well. There's a lot to learn, and we're all still learning. We're all still growing. So just to sort of set expectations of some of what I'm going to talk about is, again, as Shards mentioned, this is not like a big deep dive. There's so much to software, so many things to look at. So we're going to just take a nice little easily digestible bite-sized piece of Noesis and some of the getting started stuff. Anything that I share is just from what I know. There might be things you find that work better than what I might show. I encourage you to share those with myself, with everyone else as well as we go through this beyond this presentation, share the knowledge. That way we can all level up together. And so it really makes this so special. As Shards mentioned, getting started with Studio, downloading it is a little funky. So we're going to take a quick little look at that. So this is the Noesis Studio download link. And when you go there, it might ask to make sure that you are in fact a human being, which I hope you all are. Um, and so this page, I'm just going to scroll down just a little bit and you'll find this getting started section with a download Noesis Studio beta. So you can take that and save it where you want it to go. It's going to give you this zip file so you can extract that and it's going to do its
I'm
thing.
hopeful that they will have a proper installer at some point rather than this zip file thing because this thing's not signed properly. And so depending on your virus protection software, it might get grumpy at you about it.
Yes, which we'll probably see here with mine. But you'll take this studio tool executable. And then if you get this, it's not it's not bad. It's just not correct. But just click in more and say run anyway. And then my recommendation is once you get it to pop up, you can right click and pin it to your taskbar. That way you can just get there when you need to. So I'm going to do that as well. Okay. So we have this right here. Um, This is a lot beefier than what you'll see if you haven't already jumped in yet. This is just because it's pulling a bunch of my projects that I've already got, as well as it seems to be doubling up on some of the demo projects. I will say if you decide to look at some of the demo projects, some of them can seem pretty overwhelming at first because there's a lot to them. So don't fear. You'll get there in time. I'll let you know. I didn't know anything about Noesis before, and I got pretty far in like 4 days. So as long as you just take the time to focus, for a little bit when you can, you'll get where you want to be. So for creating a new project, because that's the next thing on the agenda, there's this nice big create new button. Additionally, if you have an existing Noesis project, you can add that here, but we're just going to go ahead and create a new one. And I'm going to call this workshop demo Noesis. Okay, and here we are in the main area here. So we're going to pop back over to this slideshow here for a second and talk about some of the common elements. So you don't have to know how to use everything in there to be able to create some really awesome UI. If you have not seen it already, I recently released a game for the contest called Ship It. It is a game where you pack boxes and put them onto trucks, and it's like 98% UI in Noesis, and most of that Noesis is made using stuff that you see here on the screen, which is only 6 different elements. So absolutely most common is the grid. Grid is where you can put in rows and columns and arrange them and space them out, and then you can use that to neatly arrange other elements within those sections. There's also the uniform grid, which is very similar to the grid, but this one by default is uniform. So you can specify how many rows and columns you want. And then as you add children into that uniform grid, it'll automatically arrange them. Another really handy one, especially if you're working with UI overlay, and especially in portrait mode, is the viewbox element. This one saved my life. It's an element that can scale and stretch the children to fill available space. So if you are building something for an overlay and you want it to sort of maintain its layout and proportions, but just like scale to fit, the viewbox, if you have that as a parent, is a really good choice in my opinion. Additionally, let's say you want to interact with your UI, right? The button, classic. In custom UI, we know this as a pressable. The buttons in Noesis are great because there's a lot of functionality within them, different states by default that'll just work out of the box with no code. So a lot to leverage there. Additionally, there's of course an image element, so you can bring in images. And then one of my favorites that is kind of weird to explain, but we'll see if we have time to get into it in a meaningful way. If not, we'll definitely have more talks about this. But the item control element is fabulous. You can use collections of objects to power this, and it utilizes templates. So you could say, like, for example, in Ship It, I have like 3 trucks at the bottom. I only had to make 1 truck. And then this item control, I just made a collection of these 3 trucks that all had, nested. They had collections of boxes. They had different properties and all these things. Only had to make it one time. The item control handled the rest of the work and made it into 3 distinct trucks.
To add, like, the grid is something that we had no real ability to do in custom UI. The kind of thing that we have this thing called a stack panel in Noesis, which is the closest sort of thing I think to what we had in custom UI, which let us lay out something either horizontally or I guess is this way, or vertically. But if you wanted to do a grid, you'd have to like embed horizontal ones inside vertical ones or whatever. So we didn't really have like a native support for just I want a grid of stuff, which is a very common layout in the UI. You got some stuff over here, some stuff over here, some stuff over here, some stuff over here. So like this grid layout is probably the most commonly used one you'll use in Noesis, rather than having to do like the view row view or column view stuff that you did in custom UI.
Yes. Yeah. And I'll say this too. It's not wrong to just use a bunch of grids and have grids on grids on grids on grids. I do it all the time because it is very, very handy. I do see a comment about showing how text works. That is a good call out. There's text as well. So kind of what I'm thinking we might work towards is maybe having just like a simple little thing that shows maybe some buttons, dives very briefly into just templates, maybe some text, and we can just sort of show how to arrange that out. So you'll notice just a kind of a quick rundown on the layout here. We have the assets pane over here. This is going to show you your root folders, the one that's just a little forward slash. Any subfolders will appear within that. There's also, you'll see the assets available in each folder in here. And then your navigator, this is comparable to the hierarchy. So that'll be over here. You'll see that grow as we build out our UI. We have the plus icon here. This is the element window where you can find all your different elements. Yeah, so you can see there's all these different elements and there's so many different elements. So don't get overwhelmed. Just take your time. There's lots of documentation out there on Noesis. You can go become best friends with Dorian on YouTube. That's what I did. He's got a lot of great content. There's the interactivity tab where you can do triggers, behaviors, and setters. Triggers are awesome. You can listen to different data pieces and have things happen automatically based on that. There's also animations, lots of 2D animations that you can create fully custom in here. And they make it really easy. I myself am not a 2D animator, but I made it work. And I have a bunch of jiggly boxes and things in my game because it's genuinely just that easy to do. There's the resources tab, which will show your different resources as you build out those libraries, and then your data tab. So where we're going to be for this part is mainly within the elements and data tab.
I'm just going to
So
add like one comment about the animations. Like doing animations in custom UI was very, very fussy. Doing them in here, like you have a great timeline visual animator tool that lets you like set keyframes over a period of time and then like play them and see them all happening. So if you're struggled with animations in custom UI, it'll be much easier in Noesis to do those.
yes. Yes, yes, yes. It is. There's so much. I know that a lot of us are very used to custom UI, and so like we've sort of accepted for at least for a while, like this is just how life is. But let me tell you, now that I'm on the other side, it's not how life has to be. So Noesis is a big improvement. It is a learning curve. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and start to work on building out something really, really simple and just sort of going along and sharing what it is that I'm doing. I also am trying to work on good naming habits just to keep things tidy. So you'll see me all the time like rename elements. You can select on things and hit F2 to rename them. So, okay, so by default, we have a grid on our page. As I said, you can never really have too many grids. So I like to usually kind of break things apart if you think about like back to front. So I'll usually do like a background layer. So this be like BG underscore grid. And to build out grids, so you have these sort of like thicker edges on the side. When you hover your mouse over them, you'll get that little plus icon. And if I click there, you can see it just added a line down there. So now we have two columns that we can adjust by just clicking and dragging this. And you'll notice these little values at the top. There's a few different methods of spacing these out. By default, it's on the star method. This is basically kind of terrible at describing it, but I guess sort of like ratios. So like for example, if I set 1 to 1 and then the other 1 to 1, they're even. But if I set this one to 2, now this one is 2 times wider than this one is. So you can play with it that way. There's also pixel values or auto, which will just automatically scale to fit the content within it. Um, so what I envision in my head for this, I'm going to delete this, is I see just like some text at the top and then maybe like a couple buttons that our UI would basically be super basic example of like you click on a button and it changes the text at the top. So what we could do is add in by just hover and clicking a little row into existence there. And then I'm going to grab from the text window a text block. You can either drag and drop it into your 2D viewport here like that, and you'll see its binding box is constrained to that top row because that's where I dropped it. Additionally, you can drag it into the navigator and it'll plop in that way. Um, One thing to note is that when you're putting things in a grid, the child will have these properties, row, row span, column span, and sometimes by default, these might be not how you want them to be. So, of course, row indicates which row it's in. You can see it hopping between the two as I change that value. Row span is how many rows it goes across, so 2 would make it go across the full thing. And then if I had more columns, it'd be the same situation there.
Sometimes it also sets the width and height to some fixed value, which are not what you want.
Mhm.
And if you right click or center click, I think on those things, you can like set them back to their defaults. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Center click is one of my favorite things. In fact, I'm so used to it now, I find myself trying to do it in other software and getting mad when it doesn't work. So, for example, if I change the width to some like hard-coded value here, 294, you can see that it turned blue, which indicates that changes have been made. And you can just hover over it and middle mouse click on your scroll wheel like a button, and it'll just clear clear back to the default value, which is really, really handy. So I'm going to crank up this text size so we can see. I'm going to say center align, which already flying through this so much faster than if this were custom UI, because you have to say align, text align center, vertical, text vertical align center. This is just click buttons and it's very quick. Just going to center this out a little bit. We have our text block. Now, the next thing is we need to add in some buttons. So I'm going to grab a button here. I'm going to drag it onto my grid. We can see that it positioned itself in the top row, which is not where we want it. So I'm going to come over here to row and say, go to row 1, please. Um, Now, buttons by default, they have some properties to them. You can preview your UI in Noesis Studio. So we can see that as I hover over the button, it gets this little outline. If I click, background changes. I could drop this into Horizon right now, and this would work exactly the same, but this is not how I want my button to look. So again, keeping in mind that this is not so much a deep dive into how to do it, but more so just so you're where you can do it. I'm going to create just a quick little template to show the different levels of button construction. I'm just going to call this button template. And I know that we have access to global resources. I'm just going to save it to the document root for right now because that's what I'm used to. And now you can see we have this pink outline around our viewport. This means that we're in a template edit mode. You'll see a few different colors in a few different contexts that mean different things. But this pink color indicates that we're within our template editor. So I can't click on my text block. I can only adjust things within the button. So this button currently is made up of a background border and a content presenter. So here I could go in and I could make this button be anything I wanted it to be. But most importantly, what I want to do is I just want to quickly change the color of when it's hovered. So I can go to my animations tab and you'll see in the visual states, by default with buttons, we have all these different states. So we have normal, mouse over when the cursor, or if you're in VR, the ray cast would go over it. Pressed, of course, when the button is engaged. And then disabled, unfocused, and focused. Not 100% what those do, but I do know mouse over and press. So I'm going to focus on those. Um, you can click on these states. You see a red outline now. This indicates that we're recording. It opens up the timeline editor or the animation timeline. And while you're in recording mode, any changes that you make are going to be stored, and that's what's going to happen when this state is engaged. So in my case, I want when we press, I want it to go to like red. And you can see that it put a little keyframe down on the timeline. If I zoom in here, you can see we've got this timeline and this little keyframe for the background color. Now, if I go and I hit play, I hover, it's got that glow to it, and I click and it turns red, and I let go and it goes back. But maybe I don't want it flashing so much, so I can go and click on my pressed state again. I can take this keyframe and I can drag it out. We'll make this go over about like a quarter of a second. And now when I click and hold, you can see it kind of fades in, nice and easy. And if I were again to drop this right into Horizon, that would work exactly as is. So, okay, just to keep moving right along because there's still a lot of stuff to get to, I'm just going to round out some corners here, and then we'll call this template done. So what I can do now is I just did Control 2. You can navigate these tabs by doing Control 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I highly recommend learning shortcuts. It will make your life easier. And I just did Control X to get rid of my button. I'm going to bring in a uniform grid instead and put it on row 1. And now with my uniform grid selected, I'll put that button in, set my rows to 3, and you can see the button filling that space now. And then what I can do is I can Control V, oops, in my uniform grid 2 more times. Now we have these buttons. I'm just going to increase the margin just a little bit. These look terrible. This is not a design class again, so we're not going to roast Guru in the feedback survey and say he's terrible at UI. This is just for functionality, I promise. So let's talk about some data now, because we've looked at some super basic and common elements, but we still have some data stuff to get to. So there's 2 different things when it comes to data. There's data structures, which is where you define what properties are available within the data context. I like to think about this as if I'm like making a fruit basket, right? Where I have my basket and I'm saying, okay, there's a banana in here, there's an apple in here, maybe a pineapple, kiwi if you're really feeling crazy. And that's it, right? I'm saying these are all what's going in the fruit basket. But then you have data sets, right? So these are the values of the property. These are like, okay, yeah, it's a pineapple, but it's a 3-week old, slightly overripe pineapple. This is where you're assigning actual value to it, right? So hopefully the fruit thing didn't throw you off. You'll see it in a second, so I apologize if you're feeling a little lost. I'm mildly sleep deprived. But so structure is how you organize things. Set is the value assigned to those properties. So we'll take a look at that and actually see some of that um, in the studio. So using my shortcut, Control 6 to go to my data tab. It's this one that looks like little stacked coins and a link. By default, it's blank because there's no data, but we can navigate to this plus button and you can add a structure or an enumeration. We're just going to add a structure. I'm going to call it the default name of my structure is 000. And now you can see we have our properties over here on the right. Now, currently there's no properties, so we'll click that plus button. And for this one, I want to have a just simple display string that we're going to bind our text up here to. So I'm going to call this display string, set its type to be a string, and that part's done. So the next step is to create a set. We've done a structure, so now we have to make a set. To do so, we hover over our structure and click on the plus icon here, and it's going to spawn a new little line down there. I'm going to call this my set. And now you can see with our set selected in the properties panel, we have our display string property that I can't change no matter how much I want to. But what I can do is I can define what that string is. I could have it say, hello world, right? So now that string is equal to hello world. Now you'll notice that nothing happened once I did that, and that's because we haven't actually bound anything to it. So one of the very important things that we need to know before we can actually go in and bind is this little house button with a plus icon. This is so you can assign the data set to the root. Now, one of the powerful things about Noesis Studio is being able to kind of test drive your UI without having to, save it, upload it, then check it out, then come back, make tweaks, and do that whole thing a million times. you can sort of hot swap between data sets. So if you wanted to see what your UI looked like, where my set's display string was hello world versus what it was with the first, 500 lines of the B movie, you could do that very quickly by just changing which one is assigned to the root. So we'll go ahead and click that plus icon. And now when we click on our text, we have our text field here. Currently it says text block, and that's just a hard coded value there. So we want to change this to a binding. We've got our little three dots. We'll click on that and say create binding. Hello, friend. And now we have this whole thing, right? So I'm not going to get too deep into this, but just know bindings don't have to be just one. Like in custom UI, from what I can remember, like you could bind only to like you could say like, oh, I want this to be just a string, and this string is going to always come from whatever I tell it to be. But you can actually have like relative bindings where you could say like bind to a templated parent's, property and do it that way, which is really handy, especially if you're doing buttons. So there's all sorts of fun stuff to play around with here, but for the purpose of Horizon, we're going to stay from pulling from the context, which you'll notice the little stacked coins looking icon matches our data set here. So to get to the path, we'll click these three lines and we can see, hey, display string, I know that. I just made that a second ago. So we'll choose that and now we can see that value says hello world. So if I come back over here and change it to say, how's it going? Um, it updates there. And then if you link this in TypeScript, you can change the display string value and it will update because this text block has its path. And as I wrap up here, I'm going to show one more type of property, and that's the command, because we all want to make things actually happen when we press on our buttons. So I'm just going to call this one command, and I'm going to set its type to command, like that. And then we can see that here in our set, it's showing message command. I can come to my button and we have this command parameter. And I could come over here, click the three dots, say create binding, pull from the context, grab those three lines and say do the command. And I can do the same for these other buttons. And then what's neat about that is when we go and test drive our UI, now when we click on it, it fires a command. And you can see we're getting that because it shows this pop-up that you can customize. So in Horizon, in the TypeScript, you could subscribe and listen for the commands that you send and then do things based on when you press that button. So this is, like I said, so little compared to what all you can do, but hopefully this sort of shows some of those common elements and how you can start to get those set up. But I'm going to
I would
pass it.
show one more thing with your commands. Like
Oh, sure, yeah.
you have that one command and you have all three buttons connected to the one command. But on those buttons, you could put a parameter, command parameter to say like, this is button one, this is button two, this is button three. And then when you go and you're in play mode, and you click on one, you can see that it's giving you different parameters. So like, even though they're all running the same command, like there's actual data coming along. So you could differentiate which button is being pressed by using the current command parameter.
Yes, which is
Another
super powerful.
another thing that's kind of nice about data sets is that they can autofill a bunch of fake data from you. I'm not sure if you've used that feature very much, but
Hmm.
like if you click that little like auto generate button, it will like, depending on how you set up your data structure, it will put like 1 to 10 words, and like if you open that, you're like, I want minimum number of words of 0, maximum of 10. I mean, and it will just like make just dummy text or dummy numbers if you have numbers. So it's really useful if you just want to like fill in a bunch of prose that has to get laid out and a bunch of like detail screens. You can just like click the button and get some auto generated stuff without you having to go and type a whole bunch of stuff in to your data sets. So importing assets into Horizon World. So once you've done all that stuff that MK showed you and you've saved everything, got to make sure you save before you go to do the import. the next step is to like go into Horizon Worlds and import that project as an asset into Horizon Worlds. And so one of the things that you'll be doing is you end up importing the whole Noesis project directory, gets zipped up into a package and imported as a unit. There are some size limits, so you can't go too crazy with the amount of stuff that you put in there. But I think it's like some number of tens of megabytes. But anyway, so you're gonna zip up the whole, automatically zip up the whole project. I can't even see my mouse. Oh, there it is. And then you're gonna use the normal asset import process in Horizon Worlds, and you go find it. You want to find the whatever the name of your project Noesis is. It'll be something like this, and then just click import. And then to bring that asset into your world, you just drag it out of the asset library and drop it into the world, and that will automatically create a Noesis gizmo and with that asset attached. And you might need to set the root XAML and the property panels and maybe adjust the width and height and such, but it's pretty easy to do an import. So let me do a little demo here. So this project I made to match the default like boilerplate that Horizon Worlds spits out. So this sort of Noesis project pretty closely matches what that boilerplate script that Horizon Worlds regenerate will have. It has like a text label, there's another text label, there's a button, and there's a list. And just to show you again what the data is looking like, there's a simple thing called item that has a label string. There's a nested thing which has a string, and then this page data, which is the thing that's actually bound to this particular page. It has the label. Open this up. It has the label that says I'm a simple label, has some nested structure that says some nested data object, has some items, which are items with some strings in them. And then there's a command that's attached to this button. And these are all, again, just using the bindings that that MKE was showing earlier. We have them all these different parts are just bound into the data structure, the data set that's going to be used. So anyway, so this was just a simple demonstration of this is what it looked like in Noesis. There's some data, some bindings are set up, and it's just sort of a very simple little page like that. So if we go into Horizon Worlds, what we're going to do to import this guy is we just go to our asset library. Maybe I'm going to go to this Noesis folder. You want to choose the folder where you want this thing to end up. And then you click add new. Just from the list, you just choose Noesis project. And then this is here where you have to go and find on disk where you had stored your Noesis project. So remember where you put your projects so that you're able to find them later. Mine is in here. It's called boilerplate. And I'm just going to select this boilerplate.noesis. I'm just trying to find that .noesis file that's at the root of my project. And then I will click open and then import. And then this will run for a little bit. And then eventually it will finish. And then all I need to do to instantiate this in the world is I just need to take this and drag it and drop it in the world. And for some reason, it's always dropping it at the origin right now, which is slightly annoying. But so I'm going to go and move it up a little bit. And move it out a little bit. So it's in front. So the boilerplate Noesis asset is automatically selected on that gizmo that was created. And then, like I said, sometimes you have to go and choose the root XAML file to just say, I want it to show the main page. Another thing that's commonly a problem is that it drops it in facing away from you. So you might need to, do a 180 on that so it's facing the right direction. Also, it comes in square, which, if you remember what my Noesis project looked like, it was a little bit more like 16 by 9-ish. So I might make this 1920 by 1080. And I might change the aspect ratio of this to be like 1.6. So it's a little bit more 16 by 9 looking. So then if I run this world, so you can see that it's mostly not showing very much except for the press me, because almost all of the elements I had were set to bindings. So I have the Noesis project imported into the world. The press me was static text, but all these other things were bindings. And so we're going to move on next to like how we actually then wind up those, well, how we actually hook up those bindings to a data context running things from the TypeScript code. But as it is now, it's imported and it's running and it's in the world. And then if you want to replace it, if you want to, there's no re-import here, but you can replace, but you'll have to go and browse and click the find the .noesis file again, and then it will replace the package into the asset again. And so you can update to a newer version if you've updated it in the Noesis Studio application. We did all this work in Noesis Studio to like make those bindings and then make a data set and then try it all out with the data set and in Noesis Studio. And you could see it all was working in Noesis Studio. Like if we go back to the Noesis Studio view, all these values are set up correctly because they're actually attached to this binding that's running out of this data set. When we went into Horizon Worlds, like there was nothing there yet because we don't have any of the data hooked up to the bindings. It would be great to be able to take all that stuff, all that work you had done from Noesis Studio and just like drop it in somehow into TypeScript in Horizon Worlds so that you could immediately see everything that you had just had working in Noesis Studio working in Horizon Worlds and then modify it from there. So I wrote this little utility called Noesis to Horizon Worlds. It's basically a TypeScript program that it's a little bit fussy to install programs in Windows, but here are the instructions for how to install it if you want to. I think that it will be very helpful for giving people a leg up in terms of going from Noesis Studio with all their data sets and bindings into Horizon Worlds without having to do a bunch of like hand coding and copying. The steps are straightforward, but there's many of them. First of all, we need to install Bun, which is a tool, and basically go and click on this web page and read more about how to install it. But basically, you just need to run this command, PowerShell.c irm bun.sh install ps1/iex, and that will install Bun on your computer. I've already done that, but the next thing you need to do is you're going to need to edit your path to include Bun bin in its directory path. So this looks like you're going to go and click the Windows key and then search for env and then pick edit environment variables, and it will bring up this little dialog, and you click environment variables, then you'll go down to path, you double click on that, it'll bring up this little path browser, and you click on new, and you just need to add this line right here for .bun/bin. So then you just click OK and save out all that stuff, and that will have configured your machine to be able to run a Bun and then be able to run the Noesis 2 Horizon Worlds utility. Installing the Noesis 2 Horizon Worlds utility is pretty easy. You go back to the command prompt again, and let me find my command prompt. So you're just going to run bun install -g Noesis 2 Horizon Worlds. I already have it installed, so it's not going to do very much. And then you should test to make sure it works. Noesis 2 Horizon World help, and it'll print out a little bit of help text, about what the arguments are and how it works. And so you can read about that at your leisure. So then the next step is you have to give it two directories. The basic functionality is you want to tell it where your Noesis project directory is, and you want to tell it where to spit out your scripts into your Horizon Worlds directory. So the Noesis project directory is the same place that you went to get your .noesis file, and your Horizon Worlds script directory is wherever your TypeScript files are located. So the easiest way to get this location of your TypeScript files is to open up Horizon Worlds and like click on one of your scripts, and then say copy path. And then when you go to command prompt, you'll have that path there. You can just delete that part off the end. The other part of this, so we're gonna run Noesis to Horizon Worlds. The first path we're gonna use, I think these might be in quotes too. There's gonna be users, live, OneDrive, documents, Noesis, boilerplate. So that's the place where my Noesis, that's the directory that has my boilerplate.noesis in it. And then the other directory is where my scripts are going to go in Horizon Worlds. Oops. Settings. And then I'm just going to put a -v on here so it's verbose. So I'm basically just saying, run this little command. Here's where my Noesis code is. Here's where my Horizon code is. Hit return. And basically, it's going to go through and read all the XML files and the XAML files, and it's going to output a bunch of stuff, a bunch of types that you need, and it's going to output this .ts file, which is the representation of your data set. So if we go back and look at, make this a little bigger now. Let's see, why are we not going bigger? Bigger? Too big. So if we look at the Noesis types here, so this was just auto-generated by that script. It has a bunch of enums that are built into Noesis for a lot of these types of things you can add to bindings. But it also has that page data that we were looking at. This is the page data that is the data set information that I had just built in Noesis Studio. And here's this nested type and this item type. And these are basically directly coming from this item definition, this nested definition, and this page data definition. So it conveniently builds you these strongly typed TypeScript types for all these things. And it also, if you had enums that you had defined, it would also spit them out, and it also spits out all of these built-in enums. The other thing that's very useful is if you look at this page data.data.on, that's just what it was called in Noesis Studio. This is actually a data context that has all that information that you had filled in Noesis Studio and do all your testing. Now it's just splatted out here and is available for you to just use as a data context right away when you're wiring this up into TypeScript. So hopefully this will be useful. If you had a very more complicated example, this could have a lot more information in it. And the point is that when you go to wire this up to the TypeScript code, you can just drop this data context into the TypeScript code, and it will just kind of work out of the box with the same way it was working in Noesis Studio. So if we go back over to Horizon Worlds here for a second, so we have this Noesis UI. We're just going to attach a script to it. We're going to go and we choose the new Noesis UI script. This will make us a nice boilerplate Noesis script that, like my boilerplate. So this is just generating the script, and it's adding its own data context here. Because like, as I mentioned, I built this particular Noesis project so it would match this boilerplate script it spits out. So it's, as soon as it spits out the script, it's going to automatically start working. If we look at our scripts, we have the script in the world, it would just spit out this my boilerplate UI. And one of the important things to note is that the execution mode is automatically set to shared. So the shared mode is this important thing for Noesis. You want to use shared mode for Noesis UIs. So I'm going to just jump back to my slides for just a bit to talk a bit more about some of these things I just breezed through. So, and again, this is how you run the tool Noesis to Horizon World -v, Noesis path, world script path. You can omit the -v. You can use -t if you only want the types and not the data sets. You can change the indentation layer level on what it generates. There's a bunch of other tools. I'm going to talk quickly about execution mode. The execution mode, as I mentioned, is that there's a new execution mode called shared, and it's in addition to our existing default and local modes. And when you create a new Noesis UI script and from the attached script on a Noesis gizmo, it automatically is going to be in shared mode. You can also set it through the execution mode in the scripts menu for most people, but I'm not sure if everybody has that ability or not. Some people have said they haven't seen it. So what does this shared mode mean? It means the scripts run everywhere. So there's just one gizmo, but that gizmo has a script on it that's running on all of the execution environments simultaneously. It's not like default where it just runs on the server. It's not like local where it just runs on whoever owns the gizmo. It runs on the server and it runs on every player's headset simultaneously. So the copy that runs on the server doesn't draw anything because servers don't draw UI. So it's important to note that that one running on the server is kind of just sort of a utility for keeping track of server-side things. The copy that runs on every player's headset is only rendering for that player. So, but that one gizmo is rendering on all the players, and each player gets their own view of the rendered gizmo. So you don't need to have pools of gizmos to like hand out a different UI for each player, like in transferring ownership to them. You don't need to do per player bindings anymore. The code that's running on that player's headset for that gizmo is going to control what that local player sees, and it's going to get all the interactions from that local player. So it simplifies in some ways the way you had to do things on custom UI because there's no more pooling and there's no more per player bindings. Everything is just local to that player and running on that player's headset. And if you have one gizmo and 3 players, they all share the same one gizmo, but they all locally draw different things. So it's important that if you want to display some new information for every player, you do need to communicate that information from one player to another player or from the server to every player. So you're going to need to send network events. So say, for instance, you wanted to change the color of something for all the players on all their UIs. You would need to send a network event to each of the scripts running on each of the players' headsets and say, oh, change to blue. And then each one of those would then change locally their local binding to blue, and then it would draw blue for that player. So it's a little bit different than this. Things are not automatically broadcast out to all the players like they were with a default local use for iScript, where the server would decide what everyone was going to see, and then that would get broadcast out to everyone automatically. That is no longer the way it works with Noesis. If you want everyone to see something, you have to send them all a message. So again, I've mentioned you could use a network broadcast event, but you really probably don't want to use a network broadcast event. You really want it just to send it to one gizmo or one player. So I'll talk about that in a minute. So the server-side script of the shared script, it's running on the server. It can't draw any UI, but it is sort of useful to have that script there to listen for server-side only events because, for instance, on-player enter world doesn't get delivered to local scripts, and odd item purchase doesn't get delivered to local scripts either. So you probably want that server-side portion of the shared script to be listening to those things and then sending that information on to all of the client sides of the shared script so that they can do something that the player can see. if you want to send an event from the server to just one player, you can dispatch the event through the player that could send network event to player and then the information, or you could send the network event to the entity itself, but then target just that player. If you wanted to send a message to all of the players that were running this script, you could just send an event to this entity without localizing it to any particular players. And then all of the players, if they were listening for that network event on this entity, would get that event. So this is a little bit of a confusing thing to think about, but you could imagine the server sending an event to itself, to its own entity, and then all of the clients are also listening for events on that entity, network events, and then they will receive it. So anyway, just be aware that if you want things to get to every player, you got to send a network event from one player to another player, or from the server to the player, or something like that. So anyway, I'm not sure, that's a little confusing. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions about the shared execution mode and what that exactly means. There's just one gizmo here, but it has like many different scripts running, all for the one gizmo. Anyway, so then onwards to Noesis in TypeScript. No, NPC players doesn't draw for NPC players because they don't have any UI either. They're like server players, kind of, in that respect, because they don't have any UI. So the gizmo is owned by the server player, probably. I think the gizmo is owned by the server player, but the scripts run everywhere. If you change the execution mode of a Noesis to local and then transfer ownership to a player, it probably just draws for that player. But like, that's not really the way to do it for Noesis. I would just leave it server side, server owned, and then use the shared mode. How you identify which is the server, though, is when you're in the script, you can always get who the local player is. And if it's the server side of the shared script, the local player is going to be the server player. And if it's a client side of the shared script, the local player is going to be some not server player. It's going to be some human player. So that's how you tell whether you're on the server side or the client side. And conveniently, the boilerplate script that they spit out, like when I did the whole like attach script and make new Noesis UI script, like they do handle all of this stuff, and we'll see that in just a moment when we go and look at Noesis and TypeScript. So really quickly, with Noesis and TypeScript, there's a data context that you're going to use to wire the bindings in TypeScript to the bindings that you set up in Noesis Studio. And this data context is just a TypeScript object with a bunch of nested fields. And you can change the values in that data context object, and Noesis is like watching it, and when something changes, the next frame, it's just going to render that changed value. You only want to just change the parts in the Noesis context that are changing. You don't want to change reassign the whole data context every frame, because I think that causes some unnecessary drawing. You can change the text string, and then the text string will change in the next frame. You can change some integer value for a position, and that will change the position of the bound thing to that integer in the next frame. You can change images, but it's a little tricky. There's some bugs with changing images right now, and I don't think we'll have time to really talk about the specifics of it, but there's some issues with image source from text or assets don't exactly work for people who aren't collaborators. If you want to use a path, you have to like prefix it with the asset ID and the version ID, which is really ugly. But some people have used workarounds for using setters in Noesis Studio to sort of make flipbooks and like choose which of the flipbooks images they want to display on an image. And so that works. That works also. Again, as I sort of mentioned, like this script is running locally on every player. And so what if you want to have a HUD and you only want it to be visible to some players and not other players? So previously we would do things where we would like set visibility per player using this entity set visibility for players to control which players could see something, which could not. But with Noesis, you have the special API of set local entity visibility, and that is like a non-networked local only control over whether this locally executing shared script is going to draw the UI for the local player or not. So it's a much more efficient way of doing that for Noesis gizmos. I would recommend using this, the Noesis set local entity visibility, to control whether a particular player can or cannot see a shared script Noesis gizmo. But you can also use global visibility like before if you wanted. So going back to this demo, so I was going to go and back over quick to look at what this my boilerplate UI. So this code here, this was all what was spit out by Horizon World. And it just sort of works out of the box, as you saw, with that particular Noesis project that I had made that was built specifically to work with the way this boilerplate works. But you can see that on start, they're checking if it's a local player or it's the server player. This is how they're telling whether it's running local, whether the shared script is currently executing on the server or it's currently executing on the client. Remember, it's going to execute everywhere at the same time. But if this is the server side, then it runs the start server code, and this guy is just going to listen for on player entering the world, which is again like a useful thing for the server side of the shared script to do, to listen to these server only events. And what it does is it sends a network event to the player, that particular player who just entered, and it gives them a little bit of text to display. On the client side, this is where they are making up their data context. And here, this is the boilerplate. This is the boilerplate that like Horizon Worlds just spits out. And all they're doing is they're just make this little object and then they assign it to the Noesis Gizmo data context. And that's all they need to do in order to make the data context, this particular set of data, plug into all those bindings that were set up in Noesis Studio. And then finally, on the client, they are connecting to the current player and listening for that same boilerplate event. And when it arrives, they are dynamically updating this one field, this label field in the data context. They're changing it to be whatever the greeting is. And so this is how they are hooking up a server-side event, getting sent to a client-side script, but just to the one player who just entered, and then changing their label to be this greeting that they got sent from the server. So, we can just go and quickly play this. And so it's running right now. If I jump into the world and I walk up to it, you can see that this welcome shard 632 got sent, and it updated the UI for me. So now the final coup de grace on all of this is that I talked about this page data that I had set up, that I had automatically exported from all of my Noesis project. And this has a bunch of other special things that I was testing out, especially in Noesis, not the boilerplate stuff that gets auto-generated by Horizon. So instead of using all of this stuff that Horizon generated, I am just going to import this data that I had generated by my script. So I'm just switching it over to use that data. And now, when I start the world, you can see that it's using that data that I had previously authored in Noesis Studio. If I jump into the world, it's still going to run that script that says welcome to shard, that event that still says welcome to shard 632, but all these other pieces are set up. And this little press me, you can see that it's sending out this, I'm just logging was pressed high. And this is my default behavior for commands in the auto-generated data sets. It just takes the command, the parameter, and it says I was pressed, and then whatever. This I was pressed is the value that you would have configured in the right here in Noesis Studio, the message. I'm just passing that message through to and sticking it in the auto-generated data. So hopefully that was understandable, although very quickly done. And this is how you could then build something in Noesis Studio, wire stuff up with a bunch of bindings, create some data sets to test it all out in Noesis Studio, then export all of that as TypeScript that then you can easily wire up to Horizon Worlds and see it working. So finally, to wrap up, some useful links. The Learn site has a bunch of different docs about Noesis, about using it, how configuring it, the font limitations. There are only like 5 fonts we're allowed to use right now, and then some more docs on the shared mode. The Noesis Studio site has a bunch of information. Here's this installer. Make sure you check this frequently because there's no auto update system for the Noesis Studio. So sometimes they come out with a new version like every month or so. You probably will want to check and make sure you're staying up to date. There's a lot of Noesis docs. They're not fully complete yet. There's a lot of Noesis Studio videos on YouTube. And there's a whole Noesis engine forum that has a lot of useful information for people using Noesis Studio. And then finally, there's some mentor. Gus Roth has been doing a lot of GitHub examples and tutorial videos on Noesis. So I would recommend following along with him. And then finally, just everybody create better user experiences. I think we're going to wrap up. Thanks a lot, everybody.